Love and longing, and we're back, Bob remarks, holding up a full drink cup as Jonathan opposite holds up a bag of chips. Why did we go to begin with, beyond the tradition of putting commercials into freaking anything for the sake of greedy corporate overlords? Vernon asks. Nonsense. After all, we just need them to know exactly how refreshing this... For God's sake, man. Vernon cuts off the playful, fake advertisement for Bob's drink. Spoil sport, Bob says before taking a long slurp of the drink. A tiny orb of axiom light is flicked into the side of his head. Hey, screw you! He half shouts as Miro Noir giggles at the sight of the squabble. If you girls are done, we've got the semi-finals and finals to watch. Jonathan reprimands them, and they settle. Fine, be the buzzkill, Bob says, bringing up a remote and making a dramatic press of a button. Okay, so at this point, I was actually pretty worried. As I said before, surviving a round with a princess marks you as a tough customer, so most of the other girls want to take you out fast. Miro Noir explains as her past self stomps onto the field and lets out the most ferocious roar yet. Ish Gojira, Bob calls out. It's what? Never mind. Anyways, the reason for the roar is to come across as overly confident and a braggart, make myself look like a fool so they don't expect a trick. Miro Noir explains. I see, and what was the main trick they missed with the roar? Jonathan asks, and Miro Noir holds up a dainty-looking hand and a ball of green fire dances within it. The green fire, that's hard to do, but in that moment I learned. It's a level of heat and control that's rare to find outside of a princess. Miro Noir explains as her past self breathes blue fire as a challenge. So what you're saying is that it's not easy being green. Bob sings out, and Jonathan snorts before chuckling. If I showed the green fire again there, then they'd have been a lot more careful. But I didn't. A battle princess has to be both powerful and wise, tactical and forceful. Why were you singing? Beautiful and adorable, my love, ignore the cretin making light of your achievements. Vernon adds, pulling her into a deeper hug, and she lets out a hum of appreciation. Beleg, mushy stuff, Jonathan says, and Vernon groans. What are you, 6? He demands as Miro Noir's past opponents still size up her past self, who's stomping around and putting on a show. 7, Jonathan counters as he takes a big, loud, crunchy bite of a chip. This prompts the present Miro Noir to giggle at the antics. Now, see that? Miro Noir asks, pointing up to how her past self is letting out a little puff of fire to each of her opponents. That's a taunt. Very archaic, but not one forgotten easily. Often considered a sign of arrogance, but if you can back it up, then it's a terrifying boast. Be scarier if they were little puffs with swear words or death threats glowing in them, Jonathan remarks. What does it mean? Vernon asks pointedly, speaking louder than Jonathan. That they're all little puffs of flame. Or in other words, it means that I think each of them is barely worth my attention, and it's a huge insult in a tournament and also a sign of massive arrogance, especially in later rounds. Miro Noir explains as all 5 of past Miro Noir's opponents seem to almost go into a frenzy before the round even begins. Woo, that got them hot and bothered, all raring to go, just waiting to be thrust into and take on your girl like an auk, Bob remarks quickly before Vernon points his fingers at the man, like a gun, before a bead of axiom energy slams into the side of his head to shut him up. The horn sounds and all 5 rush the past Miro Noir, who smiles viciously as she takes a defensive stance. Her eyes quickly scan over all of them and focuses on a singular fighter in the center of the formation. Then the air around her starts to ripple as in a heat haze. That's an illusion. They're all so angry they're not paying close enough attention. They think between the 5 of them that I'm already done and are planning on how to take care of the rest, but I've already moved and am charging the central one. Miro Noir explains as she holds up a dainty-looking hand that is then surrounded by a heat haze. Then she cuddles back into Vernon, looking like she's missing a hand that's just hanging in midair by itself. Well, that's one kind of handjob, Bob remarks. Do you want an ass-kicking? Because that's how you get an ass-kicking. Vernon threatens him as Miro Noir actually looks contemplative. She whispers something into Vernon's ear, and he gives her an astonished look. The illusion shatters as past Miro Noir reappears as her heels crash into the front armor of the central opponent's shell. They're covered in wisps of green fire, leading to the complete shattering of the shell as it spreads and demolishes the girl's armor. Before anyone can even figure out what's going on, She's used the falling foe as a springboard and saturated the air with more heat haze, leaving behind a clear illusion as her actual self vanishes. "Oh, she's got a kick like a donkey," Jonathan remarks in a badly done Scottish accent. The haze is a powerful illusion technique that projects all your coloration and therefore everything visible about you into the position it started out in when you use the technique, giving you excellent stealth and giving the enemy a target to go for. But those who know about it know to listen instead, which is hard to do over a roaring crowd. Miro Noir explains as the remaining 4 opponents immediately turn their backs to the illusion and begin scanning the arena. "If I call it a cheap trick, will you get mad at me?" Bob asks out loud. "I'm already mad at you. You may as well see if you can get to bedrock," Vernon grumps out. "Not you, you're doing," Bob snips back. "It has weaknesses, of course. It does nothing for sound or smell or physical presence. It also leaves you as a distortion in the air instead of pure invisibility like a cloaken. The color being stripped away and sent to the projection means you can be spotted by the clever." Miro Noir continues her explanation, deliberately ignoring the 3 men in an attempt to keep herself from laughing. "Not if you didn't leave the haze, and oh look, they've turned their backs on it and exposed their shells," Jonathan remarks with a vicious smile. "That's right, well spotted." Miro Noir praises him before her past self reappears, delivering a brutal straight punch through the back shell of one of her opponents. Her fist is clearly covered in green fire. The blow carries through the heavy armor with ease and sends her opponent bouncing across the arena floor, shedding pieces of her compromised armor until she's stripped bare from the waist up. Like Miro Noir, this one didn't have any upper body equipment beyond the shell. "There goes the PG rating," Jonathan snipes. "Oh, like we ever had one to begin with. In other words, woo titties." Bob cheers out, and Miro Noir devolves into giggles. "I'm extra glad that you've not lost this contest, my love. Don't want these cretins staring at you," Vernon says possessively as he snuggles Miro Noir close and she lets out a sigh of utter contentment. "Get a room, you two," Bob remarks as the remaining 3 opponents slam through a suddenly hazing past Miro Noir, and as they jump through it to try and tackle the obviously still hiding in the haze. Miro Noir, one of them is suddenly grabbed from behind. The haze shatters as Miro Noir reappears, holding her opponent by the tail and starts to spin. 3 fast revolutions, and she sends one opponent flying into another before charging the 3rd, trailing sparks of green fire from her fingernails and mouth. "Woof! Those have got to be nasty when you two—" Bob begins. "Don't!" Vernon warns him. The 3rd visibly panics as Miro Noir roars as she looms over her, fire building around her mouth. She throws up her arms in response to defend herself, and it's over as the sparks around Miro Noir's fingernails gather and she slashes upwards, severing the shell into 2 pieces along the more fragile straps and taking the girl out of the competition without hurting her. "Thank you for your cooperation," past Miro Noir boasts as the disqualified opponent falls to her knees in astonishment. "Well, at least the lady's polite about the pain, humiliation, and brutality she's so generous with," Jonathan says with a gesture towards Miro Noir. "Apuk, ass-kickings, whooping you with manners and massive amounts of melting," Bob remarks, and Vernon groans. "You stretched it," he chides. "Yay," Bob admits shamefacedly. "At this point, I was starting to get fairly confident," Miro Noir admits as her past self turns her back on her felled opponent and braces herself with an enormous smile. The remaining 2 move as blurs before skidding to a stop and turning as a haze erupts from Miro Noir and then springing away with enough force to shatter the stone beneath them, which is further punished as Miro Noir appears there, slamming her green fire-covered fists through where they were a single heartbeat before. She looks up with a glare before suddenly darting left after one of her opponents. "You've got them fairly well freaked out," Vernon says. "Fair familiar friend, fairly freaked former foes in the fair of fighting and flame," Jonathan says quickly, and Vernon and Miro Noir look towards him in surprise. "Sometimes it just comes to me. So what's going on?" He prompts, and Miro Noir turns back to the screen. "Something that young battle maidens are taught is that half the fight is mental. This tournament is when it all finally started making sense to me. Oh, I was such a brute back then, all muscle and flame. Yet you learned to use that lovely head of yours, my love, Vernon remarks as he holds her close as Bob mimes out, gagging to the side. They watch as the past Miro Noir jumps onto her opponent and uses her deflection as a springboard to turn it into a massive charge at the other. This catches both off guard, and the one she bounced off of loses her balance and falls to the ground as the one now being charged out gives out a shriek as Miro Noir swoops down onto her and slams a knee into her face to stun her before dragging her off. Sproing? Damn it, I can't mimic the sonic spring noise all that well, Bob curses. The downed opponent slowly stands up as her shell spikes had gotten caught in the arena floor, necessitating some awkward struggles. The moment she stands fully up, the armor of the opponent, Miro Noir, stunned, crashes into her side, cracking both shells at once and knocking her down. She's kicked over to reveal her shell fully, and the opponent that Miro Noir is now wielding as a club is slammed into it, shattering both shells at once. Oh man! Apuk on Apuk brutality! The humanity! The apocality! The abnormality! Jonathan laments. The stretching most fairly, Vernon snipes. I'd say that was more the stretch, 1.5 stars, Bob calls out. Opponents bested. Past Miro Noir brushes off her hands with a smile and gives the crowd a little bow before all but skipping off the battlefield, even as she's declared the winner. Damn, you've really cleaned out. Makes the next round look like chump work, Jonathan remarks. You watched ahead? You traitor, Bob accuses. You watched with me, you idiot. Jonathan snaps back as Vernon facepalms and Miro Noir starts shaking with suppressed giggles. You snitch! You swore to take that to your grave! Bob snaps. Anyways, back on point, milady? Vernon asks, breaking up the argument. Well, at that point it's the finals, and everyone knows I'm tricky, but everyone left is tricky as well, meaning that I'm only of equal concern to the other opponents, and not the one that has to be taken down right away. It's a strange quirk of Apuk minds. It's the most recent deeds that count the most, not the past ones. They've all but forgotten that I've impressed a princess not 20 minutes before and instead focus on the fact that I won, using my opponent's strength against themselves, and haze-filled tactics, meaning not a priority, compared to more straightforward warriors. This is their mistake, Miro Noir explains before smiling. It also helps that I haven't used more than a few wisps of green flame and the large bruise still on my stomach from the princess. Makes me look tired out and hurt when I'm still fairly fresh. So you're more of a goldfish race? Jonathan asks. What's a goldfish race? Bob asks with a big smile. The Apuk? Jonathan answers quickly. What's a goldfish? Miro Noir asks. What's with the Apuk? Bob asks. You're not funny, Bob, Vernon remarks. Goldfish are said to have very short-term memories, not lasting past 5 seconds, Jonathan explains. Why are we talking about goldfish? Bob asks. Knock it off, Bob, Vernon says. Knock what off? Bob asks, and dodges a bead of axiom. Ha! And you proved me right by learning from the past, Vernon remarks. Thank you, Rafiki. Seriously? You want Disney on our case? Bob asks. They can't reach out of cruel space. Yet, Jonathan assures him. Anyways, milady, what does making yourself look tired and hurt do? It means that they're taking each other out while you and you alone remember that the point of the competition is to defend your shell above all else, Vernon says with a pensive tone, clearly storing it for his own attempt at the Shellcracker tournament. Yes, indeed, and there it goes. 6 warriors who made it to the end, and all of them are looking cautious. The prize is in sight. Lady Miro Noir and not your husband? Any comments? Jonathan asks. Just that actions will be speaking louder than words. My little bit where I refuse to show any flame, the touch upon my bruised stomach, feigning weakness, the most dangerous opponent is the one you underestimate. She explains, and Vernon chuckles. Good to know. I wonder how long they'll fall for it with me, he asks, as he settles a little more comfortably with Miro Noir. Not at all. The sorcerers of old stories are considered terrifyingly strong to the point that it would take at least a battle princess to even catch their attention. If you somehow get into the finals, you'll be regarded as one regardless if you win or lose. She answers him as the horn goes on the past competition. She uses the haze to fade away and get some distance as in an instant 2 opponents are taken out. They're gunned for while they go for each other mutually. The two that took out their opponents begin trading blows with the third visible one pacing around the outside. So what? He's basically Morgana Le Fay or Maleficent. Not femmy enough for that, Bob remarks. No, dude. Remember, things are backwards here. Miro Noir's the knight in shining armor, and Vernon is the blushing maiden. Needs a dress, though, Jonathan explains before considering. I've actually got a... Bob begins holding up a frilly-looking piece of cloth. Remember that I'm one of the foremost experts in exotic axiom techniques, and then consider your actions again, Vernon says lightly. The duel pauses and they both rush the last, who lets out an enormous blast of blue and green flame. She falls to her knees in exhaustion, even as the other two crash to the ground with half-melted and thoroughly ruined shells. Then Miro Noir reappears, kicking her shell into shrapnel. Forget someone, the past Miro Noir asks with a gleeful laugh. Oh, yay, Jonathan shouts. Slip into a Slim Jim, Bob adds. No! The two with melted but not broken shells rush at her. Oh! Vernon half-heartedly keeps up the scream in a deadpan tone. I won't let a coward take a crown, one of them spits. Caution isn't cowardice. Concealing your strength isn't the act of the craven. We are all mighty, but only the wise are truly noble, past Miro Noir bellows as she slips between the two sloppy and desperate attacks to sink her fingers into the ruined and half-melted shells and strip them away from her opponents, shattering them on the floor to either side with a flick of her wrists. And knowing is half the battle, Bob says. G.E.I. Joe, Jonathan adds in as Vernon visibly sighs. They land and roll, but before anything can be done, the match is called for Miro Noir. When everyone's got the brawn, it's the babe with brains that beats 'em all, Jonathan notes. Woo, what a hot contest, Bob adds. And in the end, the biggest prize is mine, Vernon says, pulling Miro Noir close for a kiss. Boo! Sappy stuff! Boo! Both Bob and Jonathan call out.